This is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com with your Sunday update for this 25th day of July 2010. And now for the real news. The much-touted Dodd-Frank financial reform bill, which was signed into law last week, is now making headlines for provisions affecting whistleblowers in the securities industry. Proponents of the new law are touting reforms that will potentially make it easier for whistleblowers to report securities fraud to government agencies like the Securities and Exchange Commission or the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and will increase cash rewards for whistleblowers to come forward. Many analysts, however, point to the abysmal track record of these agencies in dealing with whistleblower information as a sign that this new law will only give a false sense of security to those with knowledge of trading violations. Boston financial analyst Harry Markopolos lobbied for years to get the SEC to scrutinize the $50 billion Ponzi scheme being run by infamous fraudster Bernie Madoff, but his detailed analysis of the Madoff scam was completely ignored by the SEC. It later emerged that Madoff's niece had married Eric Swanson, who was working as a compliance official for the SEC at the time Madoff was being investigated. In September 2004, Layla Wydler reported suspicious activity at the Houston-based company of RL and Stanford to the SEC's Fort Worth office. Nothing was done with that information until finally moving against it in early 2009. It emerged this year that the SEC had been aware of the scam since 1997, but had taken 12 years to act because they had had a difficult time building a case against Stanford's Ponzi scheme. During the time that the SEC failed to act, the amount Stanford bilked from investors grew from $250 million to $7 billion. Earlier this year, a British metals trader named Andrew Maguire blew the whistle on precious metal market manipulation by JP Morgan. On February 3rd of this year, Maguire sent emails to the CFTC predicting precise manipulations that then took place just 2 days later, but the CFTC Enforcement Division has taken no action on the matter. Earlier this week, Bill Murphy of the Gold Antitrust Action Committee appeared on the Corbett Report to discuss the latest details of the Andrew Maguire whistleblowing case. Tell us a little bit about the Andrew Maguire story and any update you have to that story.
Well, Andrew Maguire thought he would speak before the CFTC in London. He's a former Goldman Sachs guy. He's in the gold business, and they wouldn't let him testify at this March 25th hearing, so they got his statement to myself, which I read to the surprise of everybody, and I showed everybody the emails and what Andrew Maguire had to say, and he told the CFTC in advance what was going to happen. My testimony that day was the only one on this webcast all over the world that was blanked out. I mean, unbelievable. Only my testimony was not allowed to be seen at the time, and then the next day, Andrew Maguire and his wife were hit by a car in London, and it was a helicopter chase, and the guy hit two other cars to try to get away. But he's still involved talking about it with people. He's being interviewed quite a bit. There's going to be a lot of excitement, which will be announced in the weeks ahead, and your listeners and viewers can stay tuned, and you can give them an update, because we think it's going to be pretty exciting.
Critics have long pointed out that the seeming incompetence of these agencies is in fact due to the collusion of the regulators with the companies that they are supposedly regulating in attempts to suppress the most startling evidence of market manipulation. Earlier this year, Richard Andrew Grove released a documentary about his attempts to blow the whistle on an electronic backdoor in Sarbanes-Oxley compliance software that actually facilitated the very fraud that the legislation was supposed to prevent, and the fact that investigative journalists like Lowell Bergman of PBS's celebrated Frontline refused to touch the story.
I wasn't so much interested in Frontline doing a story on me. What I found to be interesting was after I had identified that there was a backdoor in the product that I was selling, and the product I was selling was Sarbanes-Oxley regulation software that was being used by financial services company across all over the world, but specifically across America. And once I understood that the purpose of Sarbanes-Oxley regulations was to keep these companies from deleting files, and that the backdoor in the software allowed these companies to delete files, and more importantly, the fact that someone outside of the company that's not even associated with the company but has access to that software could launder money or steal money or just delete money from corporations and switch financial records all around without anyone, any investigator, any auditor being able to audit that. Those things I thought were interesting, but when the SEC, after I told them bought the software with the back door in it and was started to use it for itself, then I knew that the SEC was not there to regulate like I thought it was. They were also, hey, we can find a benefit from this back door in the software. We can delete files now. Now we're above the law. And so essentially the people who were perpetrating the scam also had control, or at least controlling influence, over the supposed investigatory organizations and agencies. And that's what I thought the American people needed to find out through Lowell Bergman, because the traditional press, the newspapers we went to, wanted nothing to do with this because it conflicted with their advertisers. So I was hoping that since Bergman did such a good job and was featured in this Hollywood film and had helped this other whistleblower, that, you know, it would be appropriate for him to at least investigate the story and if there was something to it. But he didn't come back and say there's nothing to your story. He said there's so much to your story that we can't publish it.
Earlier this week, it was revealed that the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which is responsible for Sarbanes-Oxley whistleblower protection requests, has only upheld 25 of the 1,066 whistleblower claims filed, meaning that 98% of Sarbanes-Oxley whistleblower protection requests are rejected. In other whistleblower news, Kings Point graduate Lieutenant Eric Shine appeared on the Corbett Report earlier this week to blow the whistle on the Coast Guard's use of military tribunals against American civilians.
I've worked for General Electric as a civilian project manager and was trained on federal contracting. I've also been a civil service port engineer for the Navy, for Naval Fleet Auxiliary Force, Military Sealift Command, and other commands and authorities, both as a civilian and as a naval officer. So I'm very well versed on not only the issue of Title 10, the UCMJ, who and what the Coast Guard is supposed to be, but also federal contracting that gets into a lot of, you know, why the Coast Guard has come after me. But what the Coast Guard is saying now, since at least or minimally 2003, the war was launched in March, or on or about between March 18th and March 22nd of 2003. Homeland Security was just created at that time. The Coast Guard moved from the Department of Transportation, not the Department of Defense, but the Department of Transportation, into the Department of Homeland Security, into the newly created Department of Homeland Security. And when it did, it began to declare that it is, and has always been since 1915, a branch of military that is not bound by posse comitatus, that is not bound by Title V, which is the Administrative Procedure Act that they're trying to use to carry on these military tribunals of civilians here in the United States, that they are not bound or prohibited by Title 10, which is the Department of Defense, it's military law.
In other news this week, Coca-Cola was forced to halt a Facebook promotion campaign for its Dr. Pepper brand after it posted references to a porn movie to a 14-year-old's Facebook profile. The campaign involved Facebook users allowing Coca-Cola to hijack their Facebook status updates for a chance to win $1,000 each week. The company then posted embarrassing status updates to users' accounts in an attempt to garner viral publicity for their campaign. One user complained after the campaign resulted in a reference to an infamous porn movie being inserted into her 14-year-old daughter's Facebook status. When the parent complained, Coca-Cola attempted to smooth things over by offering her tickets to a West End show and a night in a London hotel. After the parent revealed details of the incident on an online parenting forum, the resulting furor forced Coca-Cola to offer a formal apology and to pull the entire Facebook campaign. Public anger over the incident is just the latest black eye for a company that has often come under fire for its atrocious business practices, including its use of child labor in sugarcane fields in El Salvador, its use of prison laborers at Chinese coke plants, chronic drought and polluted water problems around bottling plants in India that have led to fierce protests, and a case currently before the New York Supreme Court alleging that the company knew about and sought to cover up human rights abuses in Guatemala. Earlier this month, Max Keiser appeared on the Corbett Report to talk about how the Wall Street hedge funds can be used as leverage to bankrupt Coca-Cola through organized political action.
So now you've got a boycott that's taking revenues away from the company. The company is reporting decreased earnings. The stock starts to sell off. Then hedge funds start to attack it, and they fuel the stock price to move down lower, which of course encourages more people to boycott,
And now you've got leverage. Now you're using the inherent leverage in the system against the system. You're using leverage by picking the most vulnerable company to a boycott, and then you're magnifying that leverage by triggering a response in the hedge fund community to do your dirty work for you.
Now stay tuned to CorbettReport.com for episode 139 of the Corbett Report, Know Your History, Colonial Script, where we talk to Ellen Brown of Web of Debt about an historical example of the people taking the power of money away from the banksters.